What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. We are featuring Kevin Siskar today from New York City. What is up, Kevin?
Hey, Alan, how's it going? I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on the simulation.
Yeah, super pumped. And Kevin is all the way out in NYC. We are doing a special episode today where we are doing a collab between Simulation and Kevin's podcast, Ambition Today. So Kevin's the managing director at Founder Institute in New York City. He is also a founding partner at Equity Token and co-founder of the New York City Innovation Collective and venture partner at Outbound Ventures. So you've been hustling it now for 3.5 years with entrepreneurs, helping them across the world now get their ideas to fruition, impacting people. You've also been doing Ambition Today now, helping get people's voices out there that are impacting the world. So what have been some of your favorite takeaways from doing this work?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for the intro, Alan. So we actually just last night we graduated our winter cohort, 14 amazing companies. And I've actually now helped start over 100 companies here in New York, which is pretty amazing to think in a short time. But you know, some of my favorite lessons. Well, there's some of my favorite lessons from the class, from the accelerator, and there's some of my favorite lessons from the podcast. I would like to highlight that last night, one of the things we talked a lot about, and I think this is sort of a trend in 2018 with improving diversity. We've been making efforts at Founder Institute for almost 2 to 3 years now, if not longer. And we do these things called fellowships. We have one for space, we have one for veterans, we have one for girls in tech. We have a partnership with Girls in Tech to help change those ratios, right? And right now, the average ratio of female CEOs in Silicon Valley is 17%. And I'm excited because last night we graduated a 67% female cohort of Founder Institute, which is amazing. I felt so. I think the lesson there, right, is like you asked about lessons that I've learned. Maybe they're not direct lessons from someone telling us something, but things we've learned from our experience is this stuff works, right? And it takes time, right? Does it take time. But if you play the long game, right, it's just so much more rewarding and you can make such a bigger impact, right? Than if you were concerned about, the next paycheck or trying to figure something out within a month. Like you kind of need to take the time early on to find your North Star and keep walking towards it, week after week, month after month, year after year to get where you really want to go. So that's one.
I love how the ratio now of your graduates is leaning more in the direction of female. It's interesting New York is a very diverse place, so is SF, so to see people of a diverse thought and diverse places around the world be founders of companies and having them bring these philosophies from around the world baked into their companies and teaching people here out west what they've been learning. People out here in the West teach them what they've been learning. And then also just this hustle. You're right that it's about figuring out that thing that is your North Star, whatever that is, and hopefully it brings some value to the world. But even though a lot of us through entrepreneurship start very poor, and we hustle very hard through that being poor, and then only after a couple years really does it pay off, and we have to get through those couple of years for it to actually pay off. So I'm glad you highlight that. Those are good points.
Yeah, and the other thing I would highlight too, and I'm going to give a shout out to Simulation. I believe you had Adeo Resi started Founder Institute. You had him, I think, on the first episode of Simulation, which for those of you who want to know more about the cosmic psychology of entrepreneurs, and great episode, really good episode. You guys really got into some stuff on there. But I had a day on Ambition Today, and through talking with him, he always says this thing. He always says the only time a company dies is when the founder quits. And for a while, I was like, all right, fun cliche, sounds good. But now that I'm into this a ways, it's so true, right? The only time a company fails is when the founder says, I am no longer going to push the ball up the hill anymore, right? Maybe it's because you got another job offer, there's an opportunity cost. Maybe it's because you ran out of money. Maybe it's because you had a kid, life happened, right? Um, but a lot of founders just push through these milestones, like month after quarter after year, right? And the ones that just don't give up, I've seen founders burn it down to zero from 400 employees and then rebuild and build multi-million, $100 million companies again, right? And so you just can't give up. You just got to keep going, and pushing forward if you truly believe that it's possible, and it can make the world a better place.
Man, thinking about the visual of someone pushing a boulder up the mountain, and then when they are hitting it's interesting because I'm starting to paint out this analogy more, but as you push up, there are these plateaus. And the plateaus, it kind of gets a little easier. Maybe you get in some flow, there's a plateau, it's easier to push the boulder, and then you go on another up again. And like right now, we're fundraising for our Patreon at our studio to try and become sustainable, and we're on this up, right? And there's so many of these forces around us that are going like, you need to pay, you need to pay, you need to pay, and it's like, why am I doing this again? Like, it would just be so much easier to just not have to worry about this and just, do whatever else. And so that's these forces that are trying to push you down. And once you drop this boulder and you run away from this idea, like Adeo said, that is the moment that the boulder just rolls down and then it's done. So if you're fully able to dedicate yourself through the hardships of these really tough inclines, but also these plateaus where you can celebrate a little more when you've achieved some of your milestones, and then you keep going and keep hustling, entrepreneurship is the best thing you'll ever do.
Yeah, and I think I actually really let's just keep going with this analogy because it's awesome.
Yeah.
We can even make the boulder a snowball, right? So it gets bigger the higher you push it, right? Which is a whole other thing to think about. But I'd say another milestone that founders need to be thinking about, and it's underrated, is going full time on your business, right? I had someone the other day who was single and in their 20s being like, I don't understand why everyone just doesn't go full time on their full time on their business. I was like, well, some people have kids, some people have jobs and health insurance, and this is not an easy leap to make where you've quit something that's a sure thing, you have a house, you have a mortgage payment, right? And to just bet all the chips on upcoming revenue, right? And so to your boulder analogy, right? Not being full time on your business is like leaving that boulder every day for 8 hours, watching it roll back, and then sort of coming back in the evenings and pushing it back up, right? And so, another lesson from the show, I would say, you getting to being full time on your business, regardless of revenues, regardless of, it's more about your own personal runway and what allows you to do that, focus with that much time, is a huge milestone that founders need to be thinking about.
I'm really happy we're continuing on this analogy. I like how you described how as the boulder gets pushed up the hill, once you gain, it starts like a little pebble or like a grain of sand, really a marble-sized idea, and then you gain maybe attraction from a dozen people around you that are interested in it, and then it becomes a little bit bigger and more people are talking about it now. And then once you're actually selling this product, you've built it, there's more people being impacted by it, the boulder keeps getting larger and larger in size. And then if you add things like you said, family, or if you add a needing to leave to go do something for health purposes, or whatever these different variables are that pull people away from their focus on their business, usually we use the example of nurturing a child. You stop nurturing the child's going to experience some sort of nutrition defect at that moment, and so in that period of time. So with the boulder, it might be like you said, it starts rolling back a bit. If you can find a successful platform to leave the boulder on one of the plateaus maybe, or put a platform in there, maybe somebody with a good skill set then that can hold it in place before you come back, that would be ideal. I wanted to ask you about your the last couple of years as you've been identifying entrepreneurs that are that are doing ideas that are changing the world, that are also with Outbound Ventures, the companies that you guys are looking at with the NYC Innovation Collective, these companies that are trying to change the world. How do you identify companies that have really strong, and founders that have really strong values and first principles?
Yeah, sure. So let's take a step back a sec. How do you define values and first principles before I tell you a bunch of founders that have them?
Yeah. So for example, like one of our values that we identify people with is like their passion to want to change the world, their passion to want to make the world a better place. And so that's obviously a subjective thing, but at the same time, when you look at our world, if it's something like wanting to progress the sustainability of the planet, or wanting to do things like help in people with Alzheimer's, or help people that are underprivileged in underprivileged areas, or help with creating a more sustainable future in terms of energy or food production. And so the more that I identify myself with those values, and I see people building those industries, the more I associate myself with them, rather than maybe somebody that's making a game that is just meant like Candy Crush or something. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's tricky, right? And I'm gonna, for everyone that's out there, should definitely go check out the episode with Alan and Adeo, because you guys talked a lot about waking people up, right? And where we help founders, where I typically help founders, is I will help someone as early as I have an idea. I have 3 ideas. I don't know what to do with them. And someone who's as far along as, I have $100,000 in revenue, right? And so everyone's sort of in that early stage, figuring out these things and then formalizing them, right? But I would say at the earliest stage, right? Like you guys made this, you and Adeo made this analogy where like a lot of people need to be awoken to really realize their potential and not just go watch Netflix or go about their day and, waste time in traffic commuting and all this stuff, right? And so, but you made the point that people can be like the grizzly bear when they do wake up, but they don't wake up fighting, right? They wake up and slowly come out of hibernation, and like they're tired and they're groggy, and then slowly over time, over actually months to like a year, people change and become almost this new person. They reprogram themselves to be an entrepreneur, right? But I would say during that process, you don't know what you don't know, right? And you don't, which means you think you should maybe be paying attention to some things, but in reality, your mentors and everyone that's already gone through this journey is telling you need to be paying attention over here, right? And I would say, to your point about values and passion, that is one of them that you just have to pay attention to. And I can tell you from working with hundreds of founders that they don't want to, right? They're like, how do I get investors? How do I get revenue? I need a technical co-founder. I got to get this built, right? And it's like, that's cool, but literally just take 5 days, right? Take a step back, figure out like, is this really what you want to be doing? Is this really aligned with like your passion, right? With your life experience, what you care about? Because, and if it does, amazing, right? You need to go do that, right? But if it doesn't, this is the analogy, right? Passion is equivalent to the amount of gas in your tank. And so if you don't take the 5 days to step back to make sure you have the passion, I promise you, you will die. Your company will die somewhere around 9 months to 5 years, right? At some point in there, you're going to run out of gas. You're going to be like, screw it, I'm not doing this anymore, right? And you're going to give up and you're going to quit. And that's why the company's going to fail and the boulder's going to fall back down, right? Back down the hill. So passion is so important. Now, all those other things, those business things, all then get layered on top of that, and they're equally as important. But it's like this is the foundation and the hierarchy that you need to be thinking about, because life happens, and in those moments when life happens, what are you going to choose?
You're nailing it. It's so important to go back and take a third person's perspective on what you're doing and what you're building, because if it's not aligned with what you truly care about, like you said, so many people are just how do I get more money? How do I get more founders? How do I get more technical development on my project? How do I get sales, venture money? We don't take a step back often enough to look back and say that, do I want to build this for the next 5 years? Because if we did that more often, then we would see potentially ourselves going, oh, maybe I want to build something with a little more impact in a different area of expertise. Or maybe I don't want to be working at this company 9 to 5. Maybe I want to take a bigger risk. Maybe I'm at a point where I'm in my mid-20s or early 30s or wherever I'm at, and I do not want to work 9 to 5 for someone else. Sometimes there's not enough people around you that are also entrepreneurs that are pushing you really hard and telling you, yes, you can. Yes, you can achieve this goal of starting a business. You totally can do it. Sometimes there's not enough people doing that. And because of that, we don't question our 9 to 5 enough.
Yeah. And the reality too here is, let's say you get what you want, right? Let's say that you start this company, you didn't do that self-work, right? And it works, right? Now you're building this company for 15 to 25 years. Because it's making you a ton of money.
Yeah.
But you're doing something you hate. And now you're just trapped in your own thing you created, right? And, that there's reasons to figure out why you just literally take the step back in the beginning and figure out if this is right for you and why you should be doing this.
Yeah. I can't even begin to imagine what the boulder being like super massive, and then you're like you're like a good way up the mountain, and it's so massive boulder, and you're just sitting there holding it going, why did I bring this boulder up this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
That'd be so bad. It's so much better to know every single step along the way, why you're doing this, why you're passionate about it. For example, with what we're doing at Simulation, the reason why we're doing it is because we want to design civilization in a way that's more prosperous for everybody. And that helps us on this 1,000-year clock. So that way we actually figure out how to survive, how to sustainably build, and especially how to self-actualize children in the world. Right now, we have so many of these exponential technologies running forth into our world, and we're very much so leaving behind the conversation that parents need to be having with their kids about AI and automation and biotechnology and all these different ways that our society's tremendously being impacted. Yeah.
So Alan, let's just get into it, man. While we're on let's just do this perfect segue, right? So on Ambition today, we like to highlight. We really start with people's childhoods, right? And we like to figure out why people are doing what they're doing, really getting into the insights. We don't honestly care what color yacht you drive now that you've sold your $100 million business, right? We want to know how you got there, because those are the lessons that other founders care about, right? So I want to take a step back here. I want to get into the future a little bit, but let's go back. Let's take it back to you for a sec, right? Give me just one lesson or something from growing up, right, that really had an impact on you. Like, why do you care about the future, right? Like, what was it? Star Trek? Like, was it an uncle who was super entrepreneurial? Tell us your story a little bit. What had an impact on you?
Good question, Kevin. So I think a big one for influencing me towards entrepreneurship was knowing that there's this path that everybody takes, and I really like to go on the other path. And that's probably the main point. And analyzing society to the point where I almost became like very aware that almost all of my peers were going down this path. And I was like, wow, do we even know what alternative paths exist? Who has taught us about the other paths? The school system sure doesn't teach us about the other paths. Do our parents teach us about the other paths? Do our communities, do our mentors, do we even have mentors when we're 18 years old telling us where we can go, what we can do? So that's what really drew me to the other path. I wanted to be different. I wanted to be unusual. I wanted to be a very idiosyncratic figure that drew other people to the other path. I wanted to go forth on this path and then tell other people that were on the other path, like, hey, check out this other path. Look at what you can do if you just say to yourself, I can do something different. And that's probably the biggest driver for me, to get into entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And if you go back to what we were saying earlier about founders, right, and to what you just said, everyone on that other path, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so the moment you had this like awakening, you were like awoke to Deo's point, right? Where you're like, oh, maybe I could still go down that path, but what else is there, right? And you started to look around, and I think one of the most underrated things in the world is mentors, right? Everybody should have a mentor. And I don't think enough people do. I think a lot of people have people they get advice from or things on the internet they read, right? But like, you got to really find people in the world that you like, that you maybe want to sort of emulate, and figure out how to get their guidance and their mentorship. I think that's super important to achieving your goals long term.
Wow. The mentor aspect of growing up is so crucial. And this actually has some literature. I'll talk on the literature quick before I get into my example, which is that there were, I forgot exactly when the studies were done, but the idea was that there are a couple variables. I learned about the studies 3 years ago. There are a couple of variables that go into a child or graduating from high school and then choosing to leave their high school to go to a prestigious university that they got accepted into. And a couple of the variables that influence them are things like, did somebody in your high school beforehand go to that university? So has somebody already made that? Has somebody done that? Have they paved that path before? The second one is, do you have a counselor or a teacher or a member of your community or a parent that is actively saying you can do it? That you can make this decision, you can make this leap of faith, you can actually get there. Totally. The idea of mentorship is a crucial part of the influence of getting somebody from a young age to be knowing that they can bring their value and impact to the world without feeling like they have to go down the other path or be squashed along the way. And so, for example, with me, I remember when I was 19, first moving to Silicon Valley, taking this leap of faith, one of the things that I was telling myself over and over again when I moved here was, I need to find a mentor. I need to find somebody that will take me under their wing, that will help me, because I had these Word docs full of ideas that I wanted to execute, but I needed somebody to be like, no, that's not going to work, that's not going to work, this might work, but you need to do X, Y, Z to make it work, go to this meetup, go meet these people. And just imagine if you have somebody doing that. That helps you so much versus you not knowing what to do, falling on your face a bunch of extra times that you don't need to. It saves so much time. And then even today, what was it, yesterday? Yesterday, I just had one of my friends, Wilson, call me. And he's a younger guy, and he's really ambitious, and he's wanting to move to Silicon Valley and impact the world. And I'm giving him advice. And last week, somebody else called me for something similar. And so this is exactly what I want to offer back to people. Well, this is exactly what we need. We need this system of 25-year-olds helping 20-year-olds, 20-year-olds helping 15-year-olds, this whole near-peer experience. And I have so many 30 and 35 and 40-year-olds that I talk to all the time about how to help maximize what I'm doing. So this whole mentorship is crucial, and why don't we have this in our high school system? The closest thing we have to a mentor is our teacher in the high school system. But what would it be like if we actually made a day in high school when you had maybe a C-level exec from a company in the area, maybe a healthcare company or food tech company or like a blockchain and crypto company, come into the high school, and what if they were to talk for 15 minutes and maybe answer questions from the high schoolers about what they're building and how the young kids can get involved? involved. Maybe they can have a day of when the high schoolers go to that company and immerse themselves in what they're actually doing, and they provide the lunch for them and everything, something like that. We don't do this enough. We don't pair mentors with students enough. So yeah, you nailed it there.
Yeah, for sure. And you said the word teacher. Shout out to all the teachers, because yesterday was National Teacher Appreciation Day, and I'm married to a teacher, so shout out to all the teachers. But yes, we also need mentors, right? Because so many of these teachers are already overwhelmed. They have classrooms of like 30 to 40 kids, and like studies show you're supposed to have like 20 to 25 tops, right? And yeah, it's such a good point. But Alan, I wanted to ask you another question. I know your audience is probably very familiar with the World's Fair, but my audience, I think it's amazing. One of my favorite things about you is you're all about the future, but the future at like a very amazing, almost science fiction level, but right where that science fiction point like touches reality, right? And so I went to the World's Fair. You had it in Brooklyn this last year, and it was some amazing exhibitions there. But for my audience that maybe doesn't know, can you give a quick recap of what the World's Fair is and what it's doing today? And I would love to hear like where it's going.
Yeah, definitely. So we did the World's Fair for the last 2.5 years in New York and San Francisco, back and forth. And so it's a 2-day future festival featuring some of the greatest technology that you can put your hands on, like AR, VR, drones, electric skateboards, 3D printers. Then we also have a speaker stage going on both days filled with talks about vertical farming or neuroscience or AI or robotics, all these different talks as well. And so we're currently trying to figure out what's going on with our finances, because we haven't been able to turn profitability on the fairs, and we really want to make it happen. And this is so crucial. Like, if you want to throw these massive, big festivals that get people inspired to the future, it's so important to figure out how to make them sustainable. And that's a huge part of entrepreneurship, is either you fundraise, you get sponsors, you get ticket sales, you sell VIP tickets. There's so many aspects of this in order to help make it happen. And we're figuring that out. We're thinking about doing some smaller, like maybe half-day or one-day events focused on topics like AI and robotics in one event, and maybe AI in healthcare, AI in fintech, that kind of stuff. So we're figuring it out right now. But the goal in mind is totally still to get to a 6-month, 100 million person festival. As in, we want to rebirth the idea of getting a big plot of land somewhere in Houston and then having companies come there for 6 straight months to exhibit and speak, and have people flying from around the world over that 6-month period to experience all these different aspects of the future. So that is totally still on the radar of something such a cool event that we could throw and inspire people with.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Living in New York, we still have all the remnants of the mid-1900s World's Fair, right? In Flushing Meadows Park, we have the giant Earth, the sphere, the Unisphere, the towers from Men in Black that everyone seems to know. That'd be amazing. Best of luck.
Yeah, Kevin, how about I ask you one of our simulation questions, which is cool. We have a growing push right now for both globalization and for technology to be exacerbating wealth inequality. It's occurring on multiple fronts. What do you think's going on? How do we build a globalized world together? How do you balance like nationalism versus collectivism across the planet? And then also, how do you figure out what we're going to do about wealth inequality?
Well, all right. I want to separate that out there because I feel like there was a few things in there, right? So, globalization is definitely happening, and I think you look at what's happening with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and Russia, and the way that things can be influenced across borders just by using the internet. It's amazing, and I think that's actually only going to get faster. I know blockchain is a bit of a buzzword that a lot of people are sick of, but it's coming, right? So many talented people have switched from writing mobile apps to building out the blockchain infrastructure. at decentralizing the internet, so these Cambridge Analytica, Facebook trust issues can't happen again. And so globalization is here to stay and probably only going to exacerbate. And the new nation borders will probably be Earth and Mars at some point in the next 100 years. um, but so we'll see what happens there. I mean, do you have any thoughts on globalization before we jump to wealth inequality?
Yeah. Do you know that did you read Zero to One, Peter Thiel's book?
I did a few years ago, yeah.
Yeah. The idea of having the 0 to the 1 be the actual creativity or the innovation of the idea, and then the 1 to many be the globalization aspect of things. I thought that that's a really good way to put it. And I'm totally for the 1 to many, like doing that as fast as possible. There's definitely certain people that do that distribution. That's really important. But I don't think there's enough people that are working on the 0 to 1 in a way that is driven by ethics and philosophy and values and principles of building a better world. I think there's a lot of people that work on the 0 to 1 in a way that distracts people from truth. And, on the show, Ron is pushing me to be more raw and more real, and I am that, and I want to be more raw and real and not someone that hides behind an everything's positive sort of mentality. And it's just not. There's people that are distracted, and I'm not, and it's not okay to globalize our world for distraction, for the attention economy. That's not fair. It's bullshit, and it's distracting people away from truth and from so many things that are so important to building a sustainable future. So we'll address that more on the show as we keep going. Ron,
there's that word truth again. Truth. Whose truth? Your truth, my truth. Be careful with truth. I just want to say that we're all looking for truth. Confirmation bias, cognitive dissonance. Keep those things in mind, and no one will get hurt.
At the same time, I want to say we talk about on the show truth a lot, and truth is things like the Earth being a sphere. Truth is things like the Earth orbiting the star. Truth is things like your heart beating approximately 100,000 times a day to keep you alive. Truth is things like the evolution of the cosmos. These are true things. True things like you think, therefore you are. These are true things that we can agree on, and I think are important to have a fundamental objective truth. Because if we keep this postmodernist sort of mentality about everyone has a subjective reality, who's truth, true this, true that, we're actually not going to get to a fundamental objective layer of truth that we can build our civilization on. So we need to get to that fundamental layer of objective truth. Kevin, what do you think about that before we get to the wealth inequality convo?
Though is a question, right? Like, I mean, clearly, truth equals things backed by facts and data, right? We know that, but people believe in different facts and data, right? And so there's certain things people agree on more, like cancer, and there's other things like climate change that people are all over the place on, right? So how do you sort of bring everyone to the middle and a common core understanding? If you asked me a year ago, I would have said the answer was clearly and articulately show the data. But we know from building businesses, and we know from what happened with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, that that's not the case. That's only half of it, right? Half of it is hidden understanding. The other half of it, maybe even 75% of it, is marketing and getting the word out there, right? Because there's only 24 hours in the day, and no one is competing. Coke is no longer competing with Pepsi. Everybody is competing for our time, right? And our attention, right? And so how do you there's no revenue model talking about things being sustainability. How do you build sustainability into getting the word out there, right? About gun violence or humanitarian crises overseas, right? Or cyber governance with AI, artificial intelligence, right? Like how do you build these sustainable models to get that out there? And I think for the most part, that's nonprofits. We're starting to see B Corps. We're starting to see better ways of doing this. But there is some huge problems to be solved, man. Like there's so much, I would love to see overpopulation is not something people like to talk about, but that's happening. There's 7 billion people on the planet, and there's enough food, right? So how do we sustain that, right? And maybe the answer lies in, by us going to Mars, we figure out new farming methods that unlock the potential to feed a population that size, right? But there needs to be more people working in science, in my opinion, and getting the word out there and solving these things in a responsible, ethical way.
Yeah, and and this is perfect segue into the next question. Go for it, and telling us the Pinker argument's true. Everyone's coming up over time, but what are we really doing about the exacerbation of all these technologies that are helping the super rich right now, but that are more slowly affecting the super poor? And how do we figure out what to do moving forward?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I have the answer, right? But unfortunately, like it's weird how this is all, it's all so connected, right? Because like we're still having the same conversation, right? Because teachers don't teach it, right? You need to have mentors, but you need to have access to those mentors, right? And so if you grew up in a certain situation where you didn't have an environment that fostered those mentors, right? Then you don't learn those lessons, and then you stay in the same situation, right? And so whereas if you grow up in an environment, in country clubs, right, where you're surrounded by rich people, and that's all anyone's talking about is like,
Yeah.
so you pick that up, and then you figure out how to do that yourself, right? And so it's all about environment, and the good news is that the internet breaks that a little bit, right? In a good way, where you can come up somewhere and follow, the reason I am in venture capital is because a guy from my hometown of Buffalo, Chris Sacca, was a venture capitalist, and I started following him on Twitter and hearing about what he was doing, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And if he tweeted a link to an article, I would read it, right? So you could sort of start to use the internet to find ways and learn things if you're awake enough to look for other paths, right? To our point earlier. And so I think the internet will help to some extent, but then the problem that immediately comes once that happens is the bar goes up, right? Because the moment you have more people playing the game, competition gets higher, and it's harder to succeed within it, right? You got more stronger baseball players, then it's going to be harder to beat the Yankees, right? And so it's a chicken and an egg problem, but I do think that the internet will help solve it to an extent. And I think as blockchain is basically a decentralized version of the internet, right? So we're basically, again, it takes these like pockets of information and then just breaks them up even more and puts them around the world on separate servers, and democratizes access to them, right? You don't have to pay to necessarily have a subscription to the New York Times to get that information. You can, get it through a mine token or whatever, right? So I think the internet will help solve it. It will also simultaneously raise the bar. But to your point earlier, I think people just we need people to know that they need mentors, to get mentors, right? And we need people that are good mentors to realize that just how valuable taking a half hour of coffee to help someone else out is, right? Because this is what happens as well, is if I'm really good at throwing a baseball or starting a company, right? Maybe that comes naturally to me, right? And so, but I feel like I still have so much to learn. I'm not that great, right? And people don't always appreciate how naturally good they are at things, and then therefore just how much value they could be giving someone else who is a little bit further behind, right? And so having that self-awareness to know that you can give back, to try to give back, to set time aside to give back will help. I don't know how, I'm not sure how we do that on a global scale, but maybe there's a startup idea there for someone.
Yeah, I like how you looped it back to what we were talking about earlier, the importance of mentorship, the importance of uplifting people in underprivileged communities, and getting, like you said, a mentor in that underprivileged community is going to help so much. Access to technology, like computers in that underprivileged area is going to help so much with the exacerbation of wealth inequality. Maybe they can even leapfrog up and catch up faster so we can fill that gap. How
it all
about...
comes down to information and who
Yeah.
has access to what information.
Information access, the information highway. We just talked to Mel King and Susan Klimczak at the South End Tech Center in Boston, and they were totally all about that. How close are you to the information highway? Do you have to drive 15 minutes or take a bus 15 minutes to get to the information superhighway, or is it right in your pocket already? So there's that. There's so much more. But how about I ask you a question, and then we'll end with you. What do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
Yeah. All right. This is tricky. So I was thinking about this as I was listening to your episode with Adeo, and it's interesting because he broke it down by time, and the bridge was the most beautiful thing today, but time was the most beautiful thing long term. I have to say, I think it's honestly just life, right? Like I got a degree in cognitive neuroscience. I help founders start companies, which is kind of people choosing the other path, and honestly, almost an extension of my degree, where I'm trying to understand how people can navigate the world in ulterior ways, right? And so, it's life, man. It's something happens before we're born, but none of us can remember it. It's just an infinite blackness, but other people can remember it. They existed during that time, so stuff must have happened, right? And then we're created, and we have a childhood, and then here we are as adults, where hopefully we're not just meandering down some path that other people told us to do. We're figuring out our passions. We're figuring out what we care about, right? We're trying to figure out how to manifest that into reality, right? Like that's beautiful, right? Like literally taking something that's just an idea in your head and making it real, and other people are touching it, and it's helping them, right? Like people are listening to this podcast, and they're going to listen and learn from that, right? That's going to democratize the information. I'd say the most beautiful thing, it's like it's one, it's life, but then it's two, making the most of that, right? And being able to, hopefully when we're older, look back and say, I didn't waste any of it. If I did waste some of it, I had a good time. I spent it with friends. I spent it with friends and family, and but I don't think that's time wasted either, right? So yeah, that's a super high level, super generic question, but I think all this just around us is life. And actually want to touch on something to your point. I was reading on your website, 100 billion people have lived and died before us, and this was actually on your personal website, and you said, we are just 7.5% of all the people that have ever existed. The other 92 billion built the homes, the schools, the hospitals, the water mains, the gas lines, the economies that we now have that give us food, water, right? And so it's really just this beautiful tapestry, and what are we going to contribute to that tapestry?
Yes.
That's beautiful in my mind.
I love that. I love how you answered that. I love the analogy you made. It's the tapestry. It's the social fabric that's been made by this life. Life is the most beautiful thing, and what we made together to get to here, and then how are we going to contribute as we've been born into it? Yeah, loving it.
Awesome. Well, Alan, I want to thank you for coming on my show and having me on your show. And I'll do a quick shameless plug for anyone listening on Simulation. If you want to check out Ambition Today, we are anywhere podcasts are found. We've had some great guests on, some of the same guests, if anyone wants to get an ulterior story. And likewise, if you're listening on Ambition Today, be sure to check out Simulation. Alan has put together an amazing daily show here. Thanks for doing this. I'm excited. We'll have to do it again in the near future.
Yeah, Kevin, this was an absolute blast. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Definitely go check out Ambition Today with Kevin Siskar. Go check out some of the work that the Founder Institute does and get inspired and potentially get started with your business. Find those mentors around you that can help push you. Find those alternative paths and walk down them and inspire other people to do the same. Think about what your values are, what your principles are, build on that into the future. Thanks for tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe. We'd love for you to join the family. Join us on Patreon. Check out Ambition Today. Much love, everyone. Thank you, Kevin, for tuning in from New York. We appreciate you so much. Thanks, Ron Vargas, our producing partner. Peace, everyone.
Take care. Stay curious, everyone.
Stay curious.